All right, we turn now to another international story making headlines. Today, crews removed debris of the submersible from the water and returned it to land. Twisted chunks of the 22-foot submersible came ashore at a Canadian Coast Guard station today.
The investigation obviously continuing. One man, though, here in Northeast Ohio, wasn't just an observer to the news. He shares some really tragic connections to the Titanic and now to the Titan as well. No better storyteller than Leon-Bibb to walk us through this.
When the submersible OceanGate journeyed 2.5 miles below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean to look at the infamous sunken Titanic passenger ship, the 5 people on board OceanGate did not realize their own trip was doomed. Among those watching the saga unfold, a North Olmsted man who is long steeped in the story of the Titanic, for he is personally connected to it.
As it started to sink and the closer it got to going under the water, he did what anybody would do. You know, he probably either made a jump for it or waited till the water come up and tried to swim away to get into a lifeboat. And he just didn't make it.
Charles Chuck Otter is the great-grandson of Richard Otter, who lived with his wife and child in Berea, where he worked as a quarry stonecutter. Richard Otter died that 1912 night when the Titanic struck an Atlantic iceberg and sank, taking with it most of the crew and passengers. 84 years later, Chuck Otter sailed on a cruise ship destined for where the luxury liner hit the iceberg. It was to observe a dive by a man whose mission was to visit the sunken wreckage. 27 years later, that same man, French diver Paul-Henri Nargeolet, would help pilot the OceanGate Titan submersible to its doom. Otter remembers his 1996 conversation with Nargeolet.
When I told him that my great-grandfather was on board the ship, he goes, wow, that's great. He goes, that's really interesting. And I said, yes. I said, I was hoping you and your dive team would find something that belonged to him down there.
Of Nargeolet, Otter was impressed. After all, the explorer had successfully piloted a submersible to Titanic several times.
I was like, wow, I'm sure he'll know what to do if anything goes wrong. But
years later, something did go wrong. OceanGate's Titan imploded 13,000 feet below the Atlantic surface, with Nargeolet on board. In all, 5 souls lost, including 2 paying tourists. Otter has his own thoughts on tourism to the Titanic wreckage.
I don't think that the technology is enough advanced to be offering it to paying customers yet.
Since childhood, Otter has followed the story from family members who spoke of Titanic, but never in great-grandmother Kate's presence. She refused to speak openly of the tragedy which took her husband's life. 111 years after the Titanic disaster, Otter now follows the strange tale of one doomed vessel seeking another. Of Titan's planned trip to the Titanic, Otter had hoped for the best.
I was hoping they would find something that belonged to my great-grandfather.
Instead, Charles Chuck Otter now contemplates 2 mysterious and intriguing tragedies resting at the bottom of the ocean.
Wow, what a crazy story. It's just amazing, really. Leon joins us now on set. Did Chuck say whether or not his great-grandmother ever spoke of the Titanic, which claimed his great-grandfather's life?
She lived for another 60 years, died in 1972.
Wow.
She never spoke to the family openly about it. She certainly did not speak to the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren. And Chuck said that he was told by his parents, never ask great-grandmother about the Titanic.
Wow.
But he did once and says, where is my great-grandfather? And she told him he was swallowed by a whale. That's what she said.
Wow.
But she could never talk about it.
Interesting.
But when she died, they found all of this paperwork that she had from the White Star Line, the owners of Titanic, and all of the newspaper articles. She kept everything.
Wow.
But she never shared anything.
Interesting.
No funeral, no memorial service, no nothing.
Wow. Well, and you wonder how you reconcile something like that in your head. And I would think back in those times, did they offer her anything to help take care of her since she has lost her husband.
She sued for $10,000 in 1912, which would be $313,000 if she got it. They gave her $3,000 instead. They gave her $3,000, which would be like $94,000 today. And they sent her a letter saying, "We're sorry that your husband Richard was lost. Yours truly, so-and-so of the White Star Line, Titanic."
My goodness. Incredible story. Leon, thanks.
Thank you, Leon.
Good to do it.
Great story.